Welcome to the show, IB Nation Sports Talk up and rolling. It is mailbag night with Jesse Stiers. I'm Sean Stiers. We have some awards to hand out before we get started because Thomas Walsh, first one in tonight. Congratulations, Thomas. And the world famous Scotty Nitro, number 2 in tonight. With a bronze medal, David Knight, and I guess another bronze, Michael Parks.
Honorable mention.
Yeah, that's right. Top 4 finishers for tonight. So they are all in. Those were the first 4 guys in, but don't matter if you're first or 100th in our little world here. It's mailbag night, so that means submit the questions. That's all you have to do. Ask the questions, and we will answer them tonight. How are things in Cleveland this evening, Jesse?
Things are going well. I feel like I've been spinning the first 3 days of this week. There's just a lot going on. My buddy lost his power at his apartment complex, so he's been kind of staying with us the last couple of nights, and he's got a cat, and so they've been upstairs, and it's just a person in the house. I had to make some cookies today for a work event. I feel like we're finishing up a lot of work before Christmas hits, trying to get all of our projects out. So there's just a lot going on. It feels like I'm just running in circles, and there's not enough time in the day to get everything accomplished that I want to get accomplished.
Yeah, I mean, you get up against it a little bit, getting close to the holidays, Christmas. It's like a week from this weekend. It is Christmas. It will be here. You got all that to worry about and everything else. So I see some guys are still logging in. So did you see the American Football Coaches Association All-American teams that came out? 5 Irish players. Michael Vinson, the long snapper, got some All-American honors. I mean, good for him, but it was I'm just gonna say I didn't realize they gave out All-American honors to the long snappers.
Yeah, it's funny. I saw Brian, I can't remember when it was, but it was recently talking about Notre Dame's long snapper and the fact that they were returning and how good he was and how significant it was. And, in my head, not trying to discredit anyone, but I was like, how important could a long snapper, really be? I know you want to get it there, right? And so, like, what is their measure? Like, are you putting it on the hands every time? It has to be some sort of like you have a circle that has a certain diameter. And to me, it feels like you're trying to hit bullseye on that circle every time. And that's got to be, how you're judged. And again, it's coming full circle now because of, there is an importance to it. You got to get the ball there quickly. I'm sure timing, accuracy, and speed are probably like the top 3, aspects of being a good long snapper. And hey, if Notre Dame has an All-American long snapper, we could just add it to the list. It's never a bad thing to have an All-American.
And they'll bring him back. He announced he's returning. He was kind of on the fence a little bit earlier in the season. He was kind of leaning, Mike and Brian Mason told us this the other day. He was leaning toward not returning initially and ultimately, decided that he's coming back. So now they return an All-American long snapper. So good for them. We'll talk more about that, the Michael Mayer aspect of the All-American stuff. Michael Mayer ended up being a consensus All-American, which means that he got first team from 3 of the 5 major All-American teams. So good for him. Jarrett Patterson, by the way, got the Coaches Association second team. And I think I said earlier this week that Patterson was out of eligibility. He actually has one more season of eligibility left. I thought 2018 was his freshman year. I thought that he played more than 4 games his freshman year. That was the first year that they did you can play in up to 4 games and still maintain a season of eligibility. I thought he played in more than that. So he's been here for 18, 19, 20, for 5 years. Because of COVID, he still has one more year left. But we all expect that he will at some point declare for the NFL draft. Which he should, I think.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I don't know kind of what's left to prove if you're Patterson, right? Like, I know that your ultimate goal in college is to win a national championship, but I don't think you should come back solely for that reason, considering how well he's going to perform, the accolades that he has, and potentially he's definitely a first round grade in my opinion. So it's hard to turn down a first round grade and a first round opportunity. So for me, I don't think there's a question whether or not Patterson is staying or leaving.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so. I wouldn't think so either, because he was in a situation where he could have declared last year and probably would have been drafted, wanted to come back and get better, played all year with an injured foot, and is still going to play in the bowl game as well. And that's kind of what we were talking about the other day, but he's going to play in the bowl game. And again, I don't think where he is that he's going to improve his stock enough if he were to come back for one more year. It would help the offensive line, obviously, to have a guy of his quality, but at the same time, you've kind of got a log jam with those interior linemen. There's some guys waiting for some opportunities like Kristofic and Spindler, and you've got other guys, even behind them as well. So I'm not really curious, I guess, to see what he's going to do. Again, I feel like it's more a foregone conclusion than anything. But he does ultimately have a decision to make, if it's a decision for him. So we'll see what happens. But again, I think that he ends up heading out for the draft. All right, we've got some questions, so we can go ahead and get started here. And again, just bring in your questions if you'd like, and get going, because it is mailbag night. It's about you, viewer/listener, all questions that you come up with until we get to rapid fire anyway. So I'll just start with Thomas's question: the status of Tobias Merriweather. He was in concussion protocol for 3 weeks at the end of the season. Probably would have been a starter. He was to the point where it sounds like the staff was ready to put him into the starting lineup at that point, but because of the concussion protocol, he missed those 3 weeks, but he has been practicing. And, so that's where he is. He is back. He is out of concussion protocol and he is practicing. So that's good news. And, like, we've all wanted to see full-fledged Tobias Merriweather, so I think that's good news for Notre Dame and Notre Dame fans when it comes to the Gator Bowl here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I think it's even more exciting news considering that Tyler Buchner is going to be out. He has a stronger, better arm, can stretch the ball downfield a little bit more, and we know that's Tobias's strength. And considering he's young and the rest of the team is going to, overall the team is going to be on the younger side compared to where they were at the USC game because of transfers. And just getting some guys some experience. When you have a month off between bowl games, you kind of, as a younger guy, get the opportunity to bridge that gap and potentially, get more playing time in this bowl game. So someone like him, I think it's a complete advantage that he's going to get the opportunity to play with Buchner in the lineup. And I think that they're going to try to utilize him downfield. Like I was saying, it's going to be fun seeing, Estime, Diggs, Chris Tyree, Tobias Merriweather, Lindsey, all on the field at the same time, and the potential, the matchups that they can create with all that speed and athleticism in space. If I'm Tyler Buchner, I'm very happy with what I'm coming back to.
Yeah, I agree. Can be a big time weapon, and we get to get little glimpses, little tastes of it. But I think that we'd all like to see more full-fledged Tobias going forward. I'll let you start with this one. I think this is an interesting one, Jess, since you're Mr. Whiteboard guy and everything else. Are TR and AG trying to implement too much NFL type stuff into their respective schemes? TR, of course, being Tommy Rees, AG being Al Golden. I ask because neither one seemed to scheme/game plan to get the most out of the talent they had to work with. So what do you think about that, Coach?
I'll start with Tommy Rees on the offensive side. Tommy Rees has come out and said that he spent a lot of the time in the offseason studying the NFL. So obviously we're going to see kind of, similar styles implemented into his schemes. I don't think that that's necessarily Tommy Rees's issue. I just think Tommy Rees gets away from what works best for his teams at time. I don't think he's necessarily trying. At times, yes, he is trying to do too much, but I think that he tries to get too fancy and too cute rather than kind of sticking with what's working in that game. And then obviously at halftime, you have to be able to make the proper adjustments, based on what the other team is going to show you. But to me, the best strategy, and I like this a lot. I think it was the BYU game. Notre Dame came out and they ran a lot of different offensive set personnels in their 15, 20 players or so. And what I found interesting about that is you got to try out or kind of test all these different formations and see how BYU was going to respond. And then you can kind of pick and choose, what you want to go with going forward. So I don't mind having an abundance kind of plays to pick from. But when it comes down to game time and you're in the game, you have to narrow it down and really focus on what's working for you in that game. I think that's my biggest complaint about Tommy Rees. I just don't think he sticks to what's working. He tries to kind of deter from the path and get a little too cute at times.
Yeah, like he has his idea of what he thinks should work, and he probably sticks with that too long when there are other options because they do have so much personnel flexibility with what they can do, whether it's 21, 12, 11, all these different looks, 31 even that we've talked about. It's like he kind of gets stuck predominantly on 12 and 13, it seems like. And I'm trying to think of which game. I think it was the Clemson game where, or was it Boston College? Yeah, it was Boston College. It was after the Clemson game. Where like 12, they were just pounding BC with 12, I believe. And then all of a sudden, it's like, okay, now they're going to go back to 11. Go with what works, stick with what works, but also be able to adjust based on,
Right.
Don't just throw a personnel group out there to do it. If it's working, you can stick with it. But just the flip side of that, if it's not working, don't stick with it. What do you think about the defensive side with Al Golden? I did feel like, especially early on, maybe things were a little bit too complicated. And like when people start talking about young guys and wanting to get young guys more involved, I think that can add another layer to, maybe what takes a young guy longer if things are too complicated in the scheme.
Yeah, so I do agree early on. I think that Al Golden was kind of throwing a little bit too much at his players, and I think you kind of saw that. And once they kind of simplified things, I think guys were able to ease in and have a little bit more confidence, in their play. But I would say the main thing with Al Golden's defense is, by the end of the season, this was a defense that finished top 20, top 25 in the country overall as a defensive unit, right? You would have liked to see more interceptions. And we've talked about this before. Even though teams weren't getting into the red zone a lot, you would still like there to be more, red zone stops, essentially. But the main thing that I focus on is you have to realize for these players, this is the third defensive coordinator in 3 years. That's not an easy task, especially for someone like Bertrand, who's been around for a while. These guys who've been around, Foskey, who've been around for a while. It's not easy transitioning between defensive coordinators because even if a lot of the principles are still the same, it's still a different guy calling the shots. He's still trying to accomplish different things. And so I think that we saw the team kind of settle in as the season went. And that's largely because of it. Like I said, they've had 3 different defensive coordinators in the last 3 seasons. And I would say the main thing that I was concerned with in terms of Al Golden's defense overall was the linebacker play. And I think that we'll see that improve because, we saw the secondary perform very well. We saw the defensive line perform very well. And obviously linebackers were the weak spot. But to me, with the defense that Al Golden runs and what he's trying to accomplish being more NFL based and where the NFL stands today, linebackers are more of a hybrid speed guy, right? It's not your traditional kind of thumper linebacker, Brian Urlacher type of linebacker anymore. And so when we get these younger guys in who have a lot of speed like Prince Collie, Jalen Sneed, I think you're going to see this defense elevated because of those type of players. So I don't necessarily I think Al Golden, I need to see a little bit more out of him in year 2. There's a lot of things, consistency that I want to see wise. Now we have, a defensive coordinator for more than one season. And again, getting these linebackers in with more speed and athleticism, I think is only going to elevate them as a group defensively.
Concur. Larry asks if Josh Bryan is still on scholarship. Will Yoakum still do kickoffs, and is Yoakum a walk-on? End of the question. Yoakum is a walk-on. He did a great job with kickoffs this year. I think that's going to be one of the questions going forward, as they bring this new guy in from South Florida, the guy that they got the portal commitment from yesterday, Spencer Schrader. He did do kickoffs at South Florida. He did both. So I don't know. Like I think if you've got a guy who can do the job and not just do, the job to, minimal standard, I think that Yoakum did a good job. He was not on scholarship though. Josh Bryan, yeah, he is a scholarship kicker. Then nothing I've heard says that that's any different. Notre Dame is typically not in the habit of pulling scholarships, so I wouldn't, expect that that is going to change anytime soon. So that's kind of where they are with the kickers. I see a lot of different questions here. Is there any particular topic you want to hit, Jess? I don't know. I guess you can't really see the starred type stuff, can you? David asked, this was an interesting one. Is the portal affecting players' desire to work harder and earn playing time since they can just go into the portal and walk away?
I think that there's always going to be a little bit of that, right? Like guys are going to kind of see the mountain ahead of them, and rather than kind of climbing that mountain, maybe they find a mountain that's a little bit, less steep to climb or not quite as high. But to me, what it boils down to is you get an honest reflection, right? A lot of these guys coming out of high school don't necessarily pick what's the best fit for them. They get caught up with the name and the brand and potentially go to a school that's already kind of stacked up at a certain position. And they believe that once they get there, they can be that playmaker or, when I can show them type of situation. Then you kind of see how you realistically stack up with these guys in practice and being, live in person. And so to me, it comes down to what is the best opportunity for the player, and I think that they realize someone like Drew Pine, he got an opportunity here, but Drew Pine isn't, how do I put this the nicest way? Drew Pine isn't a top 20, starting quarterback in college football, in my opinion. Like he's not going to be that difference maker. He's not a Heisman
Right.
contender type quarterback, and that's nothing against Drew Pine, but he's got a better opportunity elsewhere where the roster isn't quite as stacked. And I think, like I said, when I started, these guys come into school and they don't really realize kind of how the depth of some of these positions when maybe they kind of maybe should have picked a more intermediate school that fit, where their talent level was at the time.
The thing with Drew Pine, again, like if the decision that he wanted to make was he was going to transfer after the season was over, that's fine. But the way he ultimately did it when he found out, oh, Tyler Buckner's going to get a chance to start in the Gator Bowl and they're going to bring in a portal quarterback. So it's like, oh, I'm gone right now. I'm leaving, high and dry, gone. That bugs me. Now, at the same time, there was a ceiling with Drew Pine, just like you said. He was still a 3-star guy. He worked hard in the time that he was at Notre Dame to get to where he was, just to get to where he was. He was in quarterback competitions the last 2 years. So, like him specifically, it's not like he didn't work to get to where he was. It's just that there's a ceiling with Drew Pine. And we saw the ceiling this year. You might see incremental improvement next year, but ultimately, I think if Drew Pine was still the quarterback next year and there wasn't a better option behind him, we would have seen, look at the amount of complaints that and that Ian Book got when he was here, when he ended up being the program's all-time winningest quarterbacks. There were still limitations to Ian Book. There are more limitations to Drew Pine. It looked early on like maybe there weren't as many limitations to Drew Pine, but we saw a lot of his limitations. So there's a ceiling with him. Bigger picture, like I think some of these other guys have put in their time. Again, if we're talking Notre Dame specifically, guys like Asita Ekwonu, he's put in his time. He's worked. It obviously is not going to happen for him here. Jaden Bellamy, can you say, well, did he not want to work and put in the time? Well, again, he's a 3-star guy. So he's along the same, caliber as a Drew Pine type guy. There was going to be a lot of work in front of him to try to crack the 2 deep even for Jaden Bellamy, especially with what's already here and what's continuing to come in as Mike Mickens continues to upgrade the secondary recruiting. So I think maybe in some cases there are guys who don't necessarily want to work for it, but just like with everything, I think it's kind of case by case. There's still a mixed bunch. I don't think you can throw a blanket statement over all of it. All right, a lot more. We're getting a lot of women's basketball questions in here a little bit. We'll get to them in a little bit. And I'm looking. Okay, here we are. This, but the screen was confusing me here. DMND13, it wants to know, who do I like working with more, Vince or Jesse? Clearly
Just
not
throwing it
trying to
out
cause
there.
any problems. Well, Vince is off putting up Christmas lights on his house right now. So I realize he's got to do his Clark Griswold thing, but come on. Jesse's not out putting up lights right now. I
I
think the
am out
answer is
tomorrow,
obvious.
though.
Oh, you are tomorrow? Well, okay. So both of you, you're fired.
We're on your naughty list.
That's right.
I liked the question by Gavin Harden, if you see that one.
I saw it a second ago. The one about focusing the
Stretching.
defense and stringing out plays. That one.
Yes.
Do y'all think Notre Dame? Let me read the question, then I'll let you go. Should Notre Dame focus the defense around stringing out plays and playing east and west due to their speed on defense, lack of size between the tackles?
I think that, I think this is obviously when you are kind of traditionally undersized, how do you utilize what you're good at? And Notre Dame going forward is going to have a lot of speed at the linebacker position. We've seen their speed in the secondary. And of course, we've seen, they don't have traditional clog guys, defensive tackles. You don't have, like those big guys from Georgia who are just massive and can clog it up. And then they do have speed on the defensive end. To me, I'm more concerned about what can you do with your stunts to utilize your speed. That kind of, how can you create pressure? How can you create different looks for the quarterback and the offensive line? And then when plays do get to the edge, obviously the sideline is your best friend. It's your extra defender, right? So you want to stretch everything more laterally than you do vertically. So I am all in favor of, if they're going to be undersized, coming up with ways to utilize their speed via scheme, and then obviously using the sidelines as your extra defender.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. You've got to, just like with your offense, same with your defense, you've got to find a way to capitalize with the personnel that you have. So I would think that would be good as well. I've seen some women's basketball, Cassandra Prosper questions. How welcoming has the women's basketball team been toward her? And there was another question. Thoughts on the women's basketball player enrolling early, joining the team in the middle of the year. We touched on this a little bit in rapid fire the other day. My biggest concern is you're coming in mid-season. The team already has 9 games under its belt, plus, like more than a month of regular practice in October and summer workouts and all that stuff. So how a player is going to fit in just from a playing standpoint when you plop them in mid-season, you do kind of wonder, because like Olivia Miles, she did it 2 years ago when she finished high school early. They weren't playing basketball her senior year. She came in, and now she's not the Olivia Miles that we saw last year, and she's certainly not the Olivia Miles that we saw this year as well, because of what I'm talking about. It's like she was an upgrade from what they had at point guard, but at the same time, it took some time to kind of get used to each other. And that's kind of what I wonder about. As far as the team, they've been great. Like, they introduced her, they're all apparently everyone's excited about her joining the team, and they introduced her. I think it was in the third quarter of their game against Merrimack last Saturday. They had her up on the video screen, and then after when the game was over, the team was out there taking pictures, and she was out there taking pictures with them and stuff like that. And then, boom, a couple days later, she's on the team. So I haven't got a chance to get your take, Jesse. What do you think about this? You don't see it very often. What do you think about a player joining up mid-season and kind of how it can work out?
Yeah, so I believe that, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm almost certain that basketball is the only sport in which you can, obviously there might be others, but I'm considering, football, basketball, baseball, some of the bigger sports, at university, soccer. You don't see a lot of players, essentially kind of joining mid-season. And you're right. The only thing that I would be concerned about is, one, that there's no animosity towards the player, because there's, it's not her fault that she's joining mid-season compared to, maybe end of the season. So the only thing that you'd have to be concerned about is, the cohesion and getting her caught up with where this team is at, because they had all the preseason, they've had games already. And so you have to be able to find a way to get her integrated into the team flow of things. And the team is kind of already at one point, and you're asking someone who hasn't even been on campus before or played with these players in any type of way to now be on the team and try to get caught up as soon as possible.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And of course, we've got somebody complaining that we're, fielding women's basketball questions, even though it's in the middle of basketball season. We're still 99% football. Don't get too crazy about it. Come on, stick with us here a little bit. Anthony wants to know preferred playing order: Tyler Buckner, Minchie, and Carr in the coming years.
I just think it's too early to really kind of answer that question. I haven't. You got to see these guys in practice. You got to be able to see them in the spring game. It's just it's one thing to look at Minchie and Carr's kind of high school tape, but there's a transition between high school and college, just like there's a transition between college and NFL. And so like Buckner's got to be up there right now until you start seeing these guys play. You can't really make any rash judgments until you see these guys playing with other college players. And playing at the speed, that the college game is played at.
Best guy. That's all I ever care about. The best guy should be in there, regardless of what year they are, in any of that. Just like look at Clemson when Trevor Lawrence was a freshman. They were willing to make a change to a true freshman early on in his career. Boom, he would have been drafted first overall probably by the NFL that year if he could have. And now I'm not saying that Carr and Minchie are going to end up like that. I'm not saying they're not going to end up like that. But bottom line for me is best guy. Doesn't matter which one it is, as long as it's the best guy. And when he goes out there on Saturday, he plays like he's the best guy. That's really the only guy. That would be my preferred order. That's the best I can say.
I thought Michael Parks just put an interesting comment in the chat. Women's basketball is setting the standard at Notre Dame. It used to be the football team. Hopefully that is a changing and going in the right direction. I would make the argument that it hasn't been the football team since the late 90s. Since 2000, there's only one program at Notre Dame that has won, I think, multiple national championships, and that's the women's basketball team. So I think you got to give a little bit more respect to the Notre Dame women's basketball team. They're one of the best programs in the nation, and if not, the best program at Notre Dame in the last 20 years or so.
Yeah. And, it's curious because I was at the press conference the other day, and we played the soundbite yesterday where Marcus Freeman was talking about the undergrad transfers, where basically everything is case by case because women's basketball and some of these other sports like that have been some of the few sports that have been able to get these undergrad transfers. And I know some people have said, well, if they can get an undergrad, then why can't football get an undergrad? And as Marcus Freeman said, it's always going to be case by case. It's, they've got to look at the transcripts, and we were talking about it yesterday. Not all of your courses, once you start school at one place, and Notre Dame has a track that they want you to be on, and not all your courses are going to transfer. It was complicated even for Brandon Joseph last year, and the guy only had a handful of credits left, and he got into Notre Dame, and he wasn't even sure where his degree was going to be coming from. Was it going to be Notre Dame or was it going to be Northwestern? So, yeah, I mean, my point is, it's always going to be case by case when it comes to the transfers and stuff like that, regardless of what sport it is. It's not necessarily easier for, women's basketball or whatever. It's that particular player has the coursework in line and is able to get in. What do you think about Sam Hartman? He's still, there's been all the talk about whether or not Sam Hartman from Wake Forest is going to enter the portal, but he still hasn't actually entered the portal. What would you think about him as a Notre Dame fit if he were to enter the portal?
I think that Sam Hartman is a very solid quarterback. He's got a very good arm. He's, he fits the kind of like that prototypical mold of a quarterback, but he is limited by, he's only 6'1", and I say only, but in relative terms to quarterbacks and some of the elite great quarterbacks, that's kind of on the shorter end of the spectrum, right? He had about 3,500 passing yards, 35 touchdowns. Both of those stats have him in the top 5, top 10. Very good QBR rating. I just think for for what Notre Dame's trying to do, I just don't know if he's dynamic enough, right? I think they've made kind of known what kind of quarterback they're going for, and I don't necessarily think. Yes, is he good pro style quarterback with a big arm? Sure, but I just don't think he's dynamic enough for what Notre Dame's trying to do. He's not a Caleb Williams dynamic. I think Caleb Williams has really set the standard now, and guys like him, like when C.J. Stroud or when Justin Fields was in college or Kyler Murray was in college or when Lamar Jackson was in college, the evolution of the quarterback position is changing to be more dynamic and Patrick Mahomes to be able to do more kind of on your feet, not necessarily running around, scrambling around for all these running plays, but just extending the plays, extending the pocket, and being able to roll out and throw the ball on the run is essentially what teams are looking for. And I just don't know how dynamic he can be at doing those things.
Yeah. Good points. How about this one? Chi-Town. We talked a little bit about Mike Leach in rapid fire last night. Any favorite Mike Leach moments that you can think of?
I always enjoyed listening to him talking about, marriage and those sort of things. There's a lot of good quotes from that one. He talked about, basically, what's the point of all the marriage? You should just elope, da 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 da. Just get it over
Right.
with. It doesn't need to be this big ceremony, whatever. And then I talked about this one last night. I loved this when he was at Washington State in the Pac-12. Someone asked him who he thought would win. In a fight between all the Pac-12 mascots, and
Right.
he went through each mascot and gave the pros and cons to each mascot, and eventually, dwindled it down into who he thought would win the game. Win overall in the fight. So, it's just in all of his stories, in all of his comments and remarks, he actually gave thoughtful responses. He didn't just kind of brush you to the side or brush off anything that was said, but rather he gave you a very interesting and well thought out kind of answers. And I think that's overall the biggest thing.
Tommy, we are not done mailbagging, so if you have questions, bring them on. I'm always, a little bit, on the edge of my seat what kind of question Tommy is going to bring, but you can always put them in there anyway. And then if we don't get to them, of course, he calls us out for not getting them as well. The Michael, it's like it's amazing to me, just in the last a little bit more than 24 hours, how many people who were able to interact directly with Mike Leach. You've seen all these Mike Leach stories. All these people have their own personal story about their personal interaction with him. And I think that's the coolest thing. There was a guy today I saw on Twitter. He did a Twitter thread, and I can't remember his name, but he was from Texas, goes to Texas Tech on a recruiting trip. He goes into Mike Leach's office, and Leach is sitting there at his desk, and above his head, he's got a bicycle that is tied to the ceiling. And the guy says he looked up and he was like, "So, coach, do you ride that bike?" And he's like, "No, I don't ride that bike." And then he proceeds to, not talk anything about football, but he's got this card trick that he does for him. And it's like, there's a stack of cards here, there's a stack of cards here, and he's supposed to pick, from each stack, red, black, and all this different stuff. And what Leach told him was, if the kid, won the trick, that he was going to have to go to Texas Tech. Well, the kid ended up, getting the trick, or, he figured it out, or he didn't figure it out, but it went the way Mike Leach thought it was going to go. But then ultimately the kid ended up committing to Nebraska, but he and Leach stayed in contact after that, and it just sounds like that's the kind of guy that Mike Leach was. Again, everyone who had contact with Mike Leach, then, that's, everyone's got a good story about him. It's really, really amazing, because especially in the cutthroat world of sports and college football, I think that is still the minority as opposed to the majority, unfortunately. David Knight, at what time in life did you realize Jesse had a good football IQ? Jesse's charts, spreadsheets are outstanding. You two are a definite gem. Thanks for the super chat, Jesse. Or David. I wouldn't say I realized he had a good football IQ, but he grew up playing middle linebacker, and that pretty much, like he dropped out of the womb and he was playing middle linebacker, and I think that gave him the football IQ. Do you remember? I was thinking about this the other day. Do you remember when you were, like, I don't know how old you were when we started this, but we'd be sitting around watching TV, and do you remember what I'd throw in the middle of the floor and what we would do?
I do not remember this.
The fumble drills.
Oh, I don't.
They weren't quote unquote, I'm doing my air quotes, they weren't real drills, but we'd be sitting there with like a Nerf football, and I'd throw it in the middle of the floor, and we'd just yell fumble, and we'd both go diving for the football in the middle of the floor and all that kind of stuff. You don't remember the fumble drills? I'm disappointed.
I can hardly remember these days what I did 2 days ago. So you're asking me a lot now of remembering when I was a lot younger. I have some memories, a lot of memories from when I'm younger, but I don't even know how old was I? Like 4, 5, 6, maybe.
Probably 4, 5, 6, 7, in that range. All right. We already did the Sam Hartman thoughts. We just did the Mike Leach thoughts. I'm kind of checking some of these off here on the back end.
I liked that question from Mr. Connor Nepper. Biggest takeaway you guys want to see in the bowl game and this offseason? I know it's kind of maybe
Okay.
some things that we've touched on a little bit here and there, but the biggest thing I want to see in this bowl game, obviously, is a win, and I want to see a win from a group of guys, a roster, a lineup, whatever you want to call it, that really hasn't. There's going to be different pieces kind of substituted in and out now, so I want to see that cohesion, how they can come together in this time off. And the biggest thing I want to see is some of these guys, younger guys, potentially taking a step in this bowl game and showing, what they can do going forward for this team. And in terms of this offseason, I obviously, this has been talked about so much, but I want to see them make that step at quarterback. I want to see elite quarterback play this offseason. And I want to see an offense that knows its true identity. I want it to look like a well-oiled machine. I don't want to see hiccups. I don't want to see bumps in the road. I want to see a team that consistently looks like it's taking a step forward rather than 3 steps forward, 1 step back, 3 steps forward, one step back type of situation.
Yeah, I agree with all that. There definitely needs to be more consistency. I think the biggest thing I want to see noticeable adjustments in the bowl game. I think I'm really curious to see what the offense is going to look like in the bowl game. You lose Michael Mayer. Now, as big a loss of talent as Michael Mayer is, I think that maybe it forces Tommy Rees to do some of these things that we've talked about, making different personnel adjustments and going with different personnel packages, rather than just go with the same thing. It's like, well, we got Michael Mayer. We've got to play to this. We've got to play to this. I think that there's definitely a different level for the offense to go to. Just in terms of the offseason in general, I want to see him finish this recruiting class off. We've got a week to go until signing day, and I know people are kind of on pins and needles about a couple of different guys. I want to see that nailed down and hopefully be able to continue with some of that momentum. Like we were talking yesterday about, does the bowl game give you momentum going into the offseason? The way that signing day is set up right now as a program, I think that finishing signing day strong gives you more overall momentum as a program than even, what you do in the bowl game. Because again, like I was thinking about this, like think about last year's bowl game. Jack Cohn was the starting quarterback. I guess Kyle Hamilton was already gone by then. I was trying to think, there were a few other guys like, Kyron Williams. He opted out. Again, like your team just looks so different once the next season starts compared to when the bowl game ends, that I'm not a big buyer in the whole bowl game gives you off-season momentum and all that kind of stuff. We were talking about transfer quarterbacks, perfect world of transfer quarterbacks. Who would you choose? Card, Pratt, Leary, or insert your own?
For me, a couple guys I really like. I like Jeff Sims from Georgia Tech. I think he's a very type of dynamic quarterback, kind of more that would be my kind of under the radar guy. But a guy that I really like and I think that could do a lot of good things is Grayson McCall out of, I believe it is Coastal Carolina. Is that right?
He's the one that's getting a lot of momentum right now. Yeah, Grayson McCall.
I not that I know, a ton about Grayson McCall. I'm not going to act like I'm, an expert by any means, but in terms of what like I said, dynamic ability, I really like Grayson McCall, and I really like, what Sims out of Georgia Tech can show you. The thing about Devin Leary is I'm not completely sold about on Leary because of, he's getting kind of passed up by these younger guys. And if he's, this super great quarterback and all these things, I think that he could have made it stick, at NC State, unless he's trying to make the case that he can go somewhere bigger. But I mean, he got passed up by some younger guys towards the end of that season. I'm not a big fan of DJ out of Clemson. I don't think he's I just think we've seen a lot of his weaknesses, Hudson Card, good big name, but really I don't know enough about him. Haven't seen a whole bunch. So yeah, at the end of the day, the guys I'm most interested in are Grayson McCall and Jeff Sims.
Yeah, McCall is an interesting one, and I was looking at his numbers. This is a guy who completed almost 70% of his passes and 24 touchdowns and just 2 interceptions this season. And it looks like he's got 2 years of eligibility remaining as well, because he played in just 4 games in 2019. So again, you're at that, at the limit, the 19, 20, 20. Yeah, so he's got 2 years of eligibility remaining, and he's a 4-year guy. So he would still be a grad transfer, assuming he's got his degree in hand and everything. So that's a guy that kind of perks up, I think, a lot of eyes in what he could do. But, again, just in terms of system fit, I feel like, I feel like as long as it's a guy who is predominantly a pocket passer type of guy, Tommy Rees can figure it out. Where he's sort of had some trouble kind of, going off script a little bit is when you have this Tyler Buckner type guy and what you're going to do with the offense. So McCall is very interesting to me. Leary, he only got to play in 6 games. His best game among those was against UConn. He only completed 61% of his passes. So I kind of wonder, even before the injury, obviously he was not doing that great. Driscoll has said no on Jeff Sims. Okay. Again, I guess we'll see. They've been, there've been some talks with these guys. So I'm really curious to see which one, assuming that they are going to get one, who they're going to be able to get here. That's really, maybe we find out sooner than later. I don't know. Lucas wants to know if you think that undergrads are willing to transfer. Oh, that less undergrads are willing to transfer because of the value of a Notre Dame degree. 4 for 40 is one of Notre Dame's top selling points. I feel players weigh that more when deciding to stay or leave.
Yeah, and I think that plays into a part of and Marcus Freeman talked about this when he got hired on and gave his, introductory press conference at Notre Dame, the type of player that they're recruiting. They are recruiting guys who are not only intelligent on the field, but also in the classroom and who are respectable, young men. And I think that is what a lot of these guys have to realize, and what makes Notre Dame such a great selling point is you have to be realistic with yourself, because after college football is over, there's like a 1% chance that you're going to make it to the NFL, right? And so if there's a 1% chance that you're going to make it to the NFL, what is the best opportunity for after football? And Notre Dame degree is going to get you into a lot of meetings. It's going to get you a lot of interviews. It's just going to get you a lot of FaceTime, and it's going, depending on what your degree is. And I would say 85% of Notre Dame degrees are, and I'm not saying they're more challenging than others, right? But a degree from Notre Dame is going to set you up for the rest of your life. It's going to give you opportunities once your football career is over.
Yeah, I think it's why some of these guys do stick it out maybe a little bit longer and don't just pack up and run right away, because you're already talking to a different caliber of student when they come in the door to begin with. And so I think that there has to be something to do with that. The fact that, like when the fact that you do have guys who are willing to weigh, okay, I've got this degree that's going to be worth a heck of a lot more than maybe, $100,000 or $50,000 extra, or, however much more in NIL, if I go someplace else. So I do think that has to weigh into some of these equations. And again, why you see some guys who are willing to stick it out longer. Now, other guys, again, it's case by case for everybody. But I do think that maybe, that there's definitely something to that, because the way that they recruit and they are selling more than just, hey, here's your opportunity, here's your ticket to the NFL and that kind of stuff. They're selling a bigger ticket than that. With that, now you can still work, you can still throw some questions as we go. But Jesse, are you ready for rapid fire?
I am. I've been looking forward to rapid fire all day.
All right, so let's do it. Fill in the blank. It's blank that Michael Mayer has earned consensus All-American status in spite of not winning the Mackey Award.
It is laughably hypocritical that he has become consensus means that you have to get majority vote from people who, there's not as many All-American voters as there are Heisman voters, I'm pretty sure. And so to get consensus, that means majority. So how can majority of, people say that he's an All-American, and consensus meaning, probably best tight end in the country, yet he can't win the Heisman? So I just think, to me, this proves my point that certain people need to have their Heisman ballots revoked, because there's...
Well, not Heisman, but Mackey.
Sorry, Mackey. Mackey. Sorry, I'm getting all these terms mixed up. But these guys, some of their votes need to be revoked because there's a clear bias. And again, if you just look at the numbers, the grades, and all aspects of what it means to be a tight end, Michael Mayer has him beat in every category. And it seems that the All-American voters saw this, but for whatever reason, the Mackey voters didn't.
Yeah. And now, to be clear, to be a consensus All-American, there are 5 major All-American teams. To be a consensus, you have to be an All-American in at least 3, a first-team All-American in at least 3 of those 5 NCAA recognized All-American selectors. And so what that means, kind of what you were alluding to, is a vast majority of the people voting for these things thought much more highly of Michael Mayer than the Mackey Award, whatever committee or group or whatever happens to vote for that. So, it would be great if Michael Mayer were walking out of college with the Mackey Award, which I think anyone who watched him play for the last 3 years would agree that he deserves. But at the same time, he'll walk out of here as a consensus All-American, and there's still, in the history of Notre Dame football, there's still a relatively short list of consensus All-Americans to come through Notre Dame. So it is still a monstrous achievement that Michael Mayer ended up accomplishing. So Notre Dame has they brought in a grad transfer kicker for a second straight year. And this one is Spencer Schrader from USF, after they brought in Blake Grupe last year. Do you buy or sell that they should just go the transfer route in most years rather than recruiting high school kickers?
Yeah, I think that it can be a nice hybrid combination of the both. And I say that because I think there's something to be said about signing a 4-year guy every 2 or 3 years that you're kind of developing in-house. But unfortunately, it takes time for some of these kickers to get, acclimated to college football. So I don't think there's anything wrong you're still developing, maybe this younger guy and providing some sort of competition, but having a grad transfer guy who's done it before, right? Like Grupe was the number 1 scorer for his program all time. He's tough as nails. He's mentally tough as nails. He's been in the big time situations before. I know he struggled a little bit this year, but no kicker's perfect unless you're Justin Tucker. But at the end of the day, I think there's a nice combination of signing a 4-year guy out of high school every 2 or 3 years, but I don't think it's something that should be sought after every single season. And it's nice to have I guess you could say like a fallback or a kind of protection blanket with this grad transfer who you can definitely rely on, as the season goes on, essentially.
Yeah, and I think that unless you are getting like the elite of the elite kicker every year, and even then, there have been some elite kickers who have, not panned out well once they get to college. Like, get a guy who's tested, get a guy who's proven, who's done it for 3 or 4 years already, like these guys we're talking about. Go out and get him, not quite ready for the NFL, but he can still, like this Schrader guy, he's booted a 52-yarder in his career, and as long as he's accurate and he's got a pretty good leg, you've got someone who's been in pressure situations and shown that he can do it at the college level already. I think it's probably a pretty good route to go with the portal what it is right now. I think that that it is a much more reliable route to go. And then, like you said, rather than spending a scholarship on a high school kid, an unproven scholarship kid, maybe you do it, every second or third cycle while you can, you continue to go out and kind of scour the transfer portal and bring in some veterans. Because, the other thing is when you've got these young guys in your program, even though maybe you've got a veteran kicking in front of them, they still have plenty of practices to show what they can do. So you get a pretty good idea of what they can do over the course of the season. So I think the transfer portal is a good route to go when you're talking about kickers.
Side note, my favorite thing, because everyone thinks kickers, they show up. What is there really to do? You're just kicking for, 4 or 5 periods of practice. One of my favorite things that we did in college is our coaches put pressure situations on our kickers, whether that be if they hit a 40-yard field goal, we're not doing conditioning today, or, these type of things. It just, talking about this kind of made me think about it. I like that aspect of, providing some of these kind of high leverage situations for these kickers in practice.
Yeah. Crystal wants to know when transfer players can come in. Basically, once the second semester begins, they can get here. And now, technically, so we were talking about Cassandra Prosper earlier. The second semester, I've been told, technically begins when finals end. So, even though classes have not officially begun, if the football team were to show up before the second semester began and they were to start workouts, then a transfer could be there with them. As long as he has been admitted and has all his paperwork, ready to go and all that kind of stuff, they can go. And like Cassandra Prosper, she's going to start practicing with the team, and she's already joined the team and she's enrolled for the second semester. And as soon as finals are over, she is eligible to begin playing in games after that. And, they'll play, Notre Dame plays this weekend at Virginia Tech. They play next Wednesday, a week from today, against Western Michigan. And then they will, after the holidays, they will go down to Miami, and that will be, the first game after, finals and everything are over. So she would technically be eligible to play at that point. And it's the same for transfer. Again, it's not like you're going to plop in. I don't think that you could do it in the course of the, football is a little different since there's, a little bit of overlap there, like if you were transferring in and that kind of stuff. But once the second semester begins you're pretty much good to go. Fill in the blank, Jess. You feel blank about Deion Sanders after his first couple weeks on the job at Colorado.
I feel, I feel, how do I feel just as excited as I did. And I think that he's already proven, he's going to go out and get his guys. I know Dylan Edwards, it was, whether you want to say it was, big recruit or not, Dylan Edwards was the number 2 player in Kansas and number 10 nationally in a position, and is definitely a speedster. So, I don't think really anything has changed with Deion Sanders and the situation at Colorado. And in fact, I think if anything, it's improved. I think that we're only going to see more and more of this, especially, once the season officially ends and we see the transfer portal, the days in which the transfer portal closes. I think you're going to see a lot more guys deciding to go towards Colorado. But I am just as excited, if not more excited, for what's ahead for Deion Sanders at Colorado. I know that he's not everyone's cup of tea, but I love his swagger. I love his enthusiasm. And I love that he ultimately he wants to win. And as your head coach, there's nothing more than you want to play for a guy who wants to win at any cost. And I think that's what Deion Sanders wants to do.
Yeah. And I mean, he's going to be trouble. This guy was one thing when he was down there at Jackson State and he was, recruiting at, FCS level and HBCU and all that kind of stuff. Even if he swiped a big time recruit away from Florida State, Notre Dame has already felt the effect right now. And he's going to be a major issue in recruiting. Like Colorado is going to become a new factor in recruiting. So, I still like everything that he's bringing for him, but it definitely stings a bit more when you are impacted right away. Like when the first big get that Deion Sanders is able to land, you were the school the kid decommits from. And that, of course, Dylan Edwards, and being Notre Dame. But, the guy had already committed to Kansas State prior to that as well. So he decommitted from a couple of different schools before ultimately committing to Deion Sanders. But he's going to use that NIL and he's going to go out and get them. He told those guys right away. So
I
he's going to
don't know
be a
if you
force to
saw
be
this.
reckoned with.
I don't know if you saw this, but Dylan Edwards actually was coached by Deion Sanders before this. I was reading an article.
I had not seen that.
When he was younger, from like second grade, up to a certain grade, Deion Sanders was his youth football coach, and
Interesting.
Dylan Edwards' father was a coach with Deion Sanders on that team. So this relationship went back, and I think that it should be no shock that he ended up kind of switching. Because I think if he wasn't at Jackson State, I think he was going to go wherever Deion was at, and I think he largely considered going down to Jackson State. But once he finally got into that Power 5 with a bigger name, and basically knowing that Deion's going to clean slate, Dylan Edwards can be that guy immediately, and have an impact.
That makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. And Anthony says Colorado's going to be in trouble soon. They're overpaying for Deion, and where is his salary and the NIL money coming from? Well, does anybody know where anybody's NIL money is coming from? I mean, it's like, yeah, come on. It's part of why it's a giant mess. They implemented this thing that they had no idea how to deregulate. The NCAA just wanted to look away and not deal with it for years and years and years. And then they had their hand forced, and you're just in a mess of a situation right now. That's what it comes down to. Fair or foul, Falcons quarterback Marcus Mariota ghosting his team after he was benched in favor of Desmond Ridder.
This is 100% foul. Come on, Marcus Mariota. You've been a career backup, right? Like you got your chance as a starter, and let's be realistic. The reason why you got a shot at Atlanta is because the guy that's been there for X amount of years left, and Desmond Ridder wasn't ready, and so they kind of picked you up as a pity type situation because they needed someone with an experience to run out there and play quarterback. So the Falcons are in a crappy division and they still can't do much. And so at this point in the season, why not run out the young guy who you can potentially develop, and you don't know what he's got, compared to Marcus Mariota, who's again has been around and been a career backup. Like, I mean, come on, it's just so immature. What did you hope would gain out of that? Do you think other teams are going to want to pick you up now because as soon as they told you you're not QB2 or QB1 or QB3, right, you're just going to ghost them? I just completely a joke. It's 100% foul.
No, absolutely. And I mean, just like you said, this guy has bounced around already. He was given an opportunity, one of the better opportunities that he has had in his time in the NFL. It's a bad division. They're not winning enough. And it's a completely winnable division for that matter. And he got benched. A lot of guys get benched. It's like you're making a lot of money. You're just going to pull the plug and cut and run and run away from the team. It's just like it's so low. It should be so below a professional quarterback to try to pull something like this. And I couldn't believe it when I saw that's what Marcus Mariota decided to do.
Yeah, and then Jason Smith just made a great point, and he's been making some good points, I think, throughout the entire show. It'd be different if he was balling out and going crazy, and the Falcons were a contender in this
he was
crappy
playing
division.
Great and they benched him. Yeah.
There's just no reason to continue to run a guy out there when you have a younger guy at this point in the season.
Yeah. Well, and then Jason said that Mariota's getting a procedure on his knee. Maybe that's pride kicking him in the knee. It's
yeah, I'm benched now.
I have literally seen college athletes who were not performing well and went to, got basically second opinion upon third opinion to find someone who said, oh yeah, you've got a shoulder problem or you've got whatever, basically kept going and seeking more opinions until they found a doctor who would say, oh yeah, you need to rest for a while. And it's basically just because their pride was getting hurt because they, were not performing well at all.
I like this question too by Irish Chi-Town. Now that we're kind of talking about it, any thoughts on how bad the NFC South has been this season? I mean, ultimately, what it turns down to is you got a bad Tampa Bay team that doesn't have as great of a defense. They have a banged up wide receiver corpse, a very old quarterback, and an offensive line that's been banged up. And then the rest of the teams are going through transitions, right? Like Atlanta, New Orleans, and Carolina. None of those teams have quarterbacks. They're all going through transition in quarterback after having guys who had been there for a while. And then also you got to look at the coaching turnover with all these teams. Carolina hasn't had a consistent coach. New Orleans has a coach. Bringing a new coach after Sean Payton had been there for so long, and of course with Atlanta too. They're going
Tampa
through a new
changed
coach.
coaches too, for that matter.
Right. And so all these
who's on the
teams are
staff.
really going through the same common denominator of, new coaches, new quarterbacks, etc. So it's not surprising that they're bad. I guess it's just surprising that all four teams are this bad.
See, and that's the thing. It's most surprising. Like Tampa should be running away with the division right now. They should have 10 or 11 wins right now with Tom Brady as the quarterback. But again, we've talked about Tom Brady, and like you think that he's going to keep on playing, and like we were talking about, should he go back to New England and all? It's like the writing is starting to be there on the wall. I understand Tom Brady wanting to continue to play, but this is part of why, like, all he's going to be doing is chasing it at this point. You get a little bit older, your body breaks down a little bit more every year. Time catches up with everybody. And he wanted to get out last year. He probably knew it was time to get out. Then he started having second doubts right away, but then he signed this TV contract. Ultimately, he comes back to Tampa Bay, even if he wanted to go to Miami or San Francisco or whatever. But Tampa should be running away with the division right now, and the whole division is sub 500. It's just it's pathetic is what it is.
It's the NFC East of a few years ago.
Yeah, that's right. SI Sports Media podcast host and columnist Jimmy Traina says it's time to get rid of the in-game rules analysts because they don't tell us anything that we can't see with our own eyes. Do you buy or sell that?
I actually buy this, and I'll tell you why. Because, I get, yes, there's a lot of stuff that we see with our own eyes, but we don't know the nitty-gritty fine details of the rules, right? Like, we don't know the nuances and the intricate rules, which I appreciate. The thing I have the biggest issue with is you see something blatantly with your eyes. You see the commentators saying what they think. You see the rules analysts say what they think. And then often the call is 100% completely different than what everyone just talked about. So that's where I have the biggest issue is you have these analysts come in and say, oh, well, by the rules definition, this should be a catch. And then you see the referee come back after further review, that is no longer a catch. And it's like, so what are we doing here? If you're the rules analyst, why aren't you the guy talking to the refs right now?
Exactly. Well, and that's, I'd say probably 1 out of every 4 times they actually tell us something that we don't know. But I completely buy what Traina is saying, because too many times these guys that, they're ex-officials themselves. And so they go on TV, they get asked a question about what's going on in the field, and the first thing they want to do is start backpedaling. They don't want to give an opinion because they don't want to be wrong on TV.
Well, and they don't want their call to differ from what's going to get called ultimately.
Exactly. So they're like trying to explain away what's actually going to be called rather than give their opinion on what should be called. Just because of what you said, they don't want to second guess the officials on the field. They're probably getting paid better money than the guys down on the field. They should be giving us more than what they're giving us. If they're going to be there, they should actually be there for a reason. Yeah, and John is correct as well. They do get it wrong often. And, say something. If you're going to be there, say something. And they're not saying
bold in what you say.
Most of the time. That's right. I mean, Mike Pereira, he was like cutting edge when they did it. And I still think he's the best one as well. I think he is far and away the best one, especially for what he does, trying to keep an eye, on all those different games, sitting there in the Fox studios and all that stuff. I think there's no one even close to Pereira for what he does. Last question tonight, and I heard this one on another podcast as well, the Ringers Press Box podcast with Brian Curtis. So, an author named Dominique Lapierre, he has passed away, but he and a friend of his owned adjacent homes on the French Riviera that were divided by a tennis court. So you've got a house on one side, house on the other side, tennis court in the middle. So here's my question, Jess. When we strike it rich, where will we own the adjacent homes and what will be the shared space that divides the properties?
I think if we're gonna do it, we got to do it big. I think we got to go outside of the United States. I'm not a fan of Florida or the East Coast, or the West Coast is nice, but it gets really hot, out in the summertime, and it's hot year round. So for me, and I've thought about this because I haven't been to a bunch of places internationally. I've been to a few, but I know there's a place you like, and I think it's a place that I would like, and I think they have great beer, and I think we could definitely settle over in Germany somewhere
Ooh,
nice, and hit a nice, if we strike it rich out there. And I think what would ultimately divide us is, we're not playing tennis. We're not going to be out there, what are we going to do on a football field? Run on it, put on some pads potentially, right?
right.
To me, I think what we need to share is a very large pool in which that we can ride around on jet skis. We can ride around on a boat. We can go fishing.
That would be a very large pool if we're jet skiing and boating on
That's
the
what I
pool.
mean. But we stroke it. We've
Sounds
struck
like
rich
maybe
at
a
this point.
lake needs to divide us.
We
Wouldn't
would own our own mini lake at that point, somewhere in Germany, and we'd have beer on keg whenever we want. And I think that we'd go out into the water and enjoy it every day. That's ultimately
well,
what I would do.
the problem with that is it gets a little bit cold in Germany in the winter time. So I like where you're going. The beer would definitely be primo if we went to Germany, so that that is a plus. I was thinking like a little bit further south, like maybe Zihuatanejo, like Andy and Red in Shawshank Redemption, down in Mexico someplace, and then we could still just have that pool that divides the house, or whatever a body of water that happened to be in the middle. And I suppose if we had enough money to actually own the property down there, we could just import our beer from Germany. Since,
At
you know,
that point, yeah. And then if it gets too cold in Germany, we just put on the ice skates and get a net and start shooting some hockey pucks out there. I don't know.
yep, I agree. I agree. All right. Sounds good. Well, we appreciate you guys and gals for joining us here tonight. As always, going to have a little bit different show tomorrow. The boss is going to be joining tomorrow. No, I'm not talking about Bruce Springsteen. Brian Driscoll is going to be with me at the start of the show tomorrow night. And then Tom Noy from the Tribune is going to come in. We'll talk a little men's basketball as well. So we'll have a little football talk at the beginning with Brian. And then Tom and I will have some men's basketball talk. And if you have men's basketball questions that you want to throw in tomorrow night for Tom, of course, you can bring those as well. So, and then we'll have rapid fire, of course, after that. And then Friday, I guess I should mention, because we were talking about on last night's show about the possibility, would we change the time and all that kind of stuff. The people have spoken. We did a Twitter poll and we did the Champions Lounge vote, and Champions Lounge ended up, getting some late votes coming in, and it ended up being a little bit closer than I thought. I think it was maybe like 69% to 31% or something like that. But keeping it at 6:00 is the way we're going to go. Ultimately, that's the way the votes went. So we'll stay at 6:00, with the exception of Fridays, when Jesse and Vince and I do the special rapid fire at 5:00 on Fridays. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, just a couple closing thoughts for those of you who haven't, maybe listened or followed Tom Noy. He's a great person, great and very insightful. And I think that'll be a treat for a lot of listeners tomorrow. So I highly recommend getting into the show. You're getting a great, great show with Brian, and then of course Tom coming in. And the last thing I want to say is, there's a running competition. We still need a name for our rapid fire show on Friday. And
That's right.
I will be handing out a prize to who can provide the best show. And
We had a good one earlier this week. I think it was Milton. It was I can't remember it now. I should have written it down. He put it in here. But yeah, so there will be there. So you're still putting the prize up. for the winner of the name of the show.
100%. I will pick the winner, or we as a group will collectively pick the winner. You give me your address, and there will be something showing up to your door as a prize for picking. This is going to be a hot segment going forward, so we need a hot name for it.
That's right. All right. So we'll be back at the regular time tomorrow. Friday Frenzy. Tavis.
That's a good one.
That's a good one. That's a good one, Tavis. Tavis McKay.
He got it
Jesse
in there twice.
Friday.
As soon as he heard prize, he's like, I got to get this in there.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay, well, hit the like button if you would before you leave tonight. We appreciate you stopping in. Great questions tonight in the mailbag, and we will talk to you tomorrow on IB Nation Sports Talk.